I will not be your bride. The words left my mouth before fear could soften them, and in the vast stone hall of Blackwood Citadel, silence fell so completely I could hear the torches crackle against the walls. Alpha King Adrian Blackthorne stood 20 feet away at the foot of the obsidian altar, dressed in black from collar to boot, his silver eyes fixed on me with a stillness that made the air feel heavier, harder to breathe. 200 wolves filled the chamber behind him, alphas in tailored coats, betas in formal gray, elders with medals pinned to their chests, every one of them waiting for me to bow my head and accept the bargain that would save my pack. I did not bow. 3 days earlier, I had stood in my father's kitchen, listening as the council explained that our territory would be absorbed by the crown before winter, unless I agreed to marry the king before the next full moon. Our crops had failed, our hunters were exhausted, and our treasury measured its wealth in single digits. Marriage, they said, was not a sacrifice but an honor. They said I would be queen. They did not say I would be alone in a fortress built of shadow. They did not say that my mother's name still echoed in these halls from the war 10 years ago, a war I believed Adrian Blackthorne had started. Now the man himself watched me with unreadable calm, tall and unyielding, his presence pressing against my skin like an approaching storm. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain the wolves nearest me could hear it. I had rehearsed speeches in the mirror, practiced calm refusals, but when I met his gaze all that remained was truth. I will not be your bride, I repeated, louder this time, my voice carrying to the vaulted ceiling 30 feet above us. A ripple moved through the crowd, sharp intakes of breath, the soft shuffle of polished shoes on stone. My father's hand trembled where he stood at the edge of the platform, his eyes pleading, not with anger but with fear. Refusing the king meant risking everything. Our land, our safety, our future. Adrian descended the 3 steps from the altar slowly, deliberately, each footfall echoing through the hall. He stopped an arm's length from me. Up close, he smelled faintly of pine and winter air, not the cold iron scent of cruelty I had imagined for years. His expression did not change. He did not raise his voice. Instead, he studied me as though I were the first person in this room who had said something honest. Good, he said quietly, low enough that only I could hear, though the entire hall leaned forward as if they sensed the shift. My pulse faltered. Good was not the response anyone expected. Good was not anger. Good was not command. His gaze softened by a fraction, enough that I wondered if I had misunderstood the man everyone feared. I have no need for a bride who kneels out of obligation, he continued, still calm, still steady. If you stand before me, Evelyn Carter, you will stand because you choose to. The hall remained silent, but something inside me tilted, just slightly, as if the ground I had been certain of was not as solid as I believed. I had come prepared to defy a tyrant. I was not prepared to face a king who did not demand submission. The word choose lingered between us like a challenge neither of us had anticipated, and for a moment I forgot the 200 witnesses, the council, the banners of the crown hanging 40 feet high above the marble floor. I had prepared myself to stand against force, not against patience. My pulse still raced, but now it carried confusion along with defiance. You speak of choice, I said carefully, keeping my voice steady even as every instinct urged caution. Yet my pack stands on the edge of ruin. That does not feel like a choice. A faint murmur moved through the chamber, but Adrian did not look away from me. His silver eyes held mine with unnerving focus, not dominating, not retreating, simply waiting. Your lands will not be taken, he replied, his tone measured and clear enough for the hall to hear. Not because you marry me. Because they are under my protection. The elders exchanged startled glances. Protection without contract was unheard of in the Northern Territories. My father straightened slightly, disbelief written across his face. Protection has terms, I said. It always does. A corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile, more an acknowledgement. Yes, he said. It does. And my term is honesty. He stepped half a pace closer, enough that I could see the faint scar that traced from his temple into his dark hair. A thin pale line against otherwise flawless skin. I had grown up hearing stories of this man, tales of ruthless conquest and cold decisions made without hesitation. Yet standing here, inches from him, I sensed something else beneath the stillness, something restrained rather than cruel. You believe I am the reason your mother is gone, he said quietly. The word struck harder than any accusation. I had never spoken that fear aloud within these walls. My throat tightened, but I did not deny it. He nodded once, as if my silence confirmed what he already knew. The campaign 10 years ago was not my choice, he continued. It was a rebellion I inherited at 19 years old. I ended it in less than 3 months. Your mother volunteered as a negotiator. She saved lives on both sides. The hall remained silent, the air heavy with listening. She asked one thing of me before she returned home, he said. That I watch over Silver Hollow if the peace ever faltered. My heart stumbled. My mother had never spoken of this. To me she had simply been brave, compassionate, and then suddenly gone during a winter outbreak that followed the unrest. You expect me to believe this now? I asked, though my voice lacked its earlier sharpness. I expect you to question it, he answered, and then verify it. I have brought the original letters. They are yours to read. Behind him, one of the royal guard stepped forward, holding a sealed leather folder. The gesture was deliberate, transparent. Not a command. An offering. I realized then that the hall no longer felt like a courtroom. It felt like a threshold. If you walk away today, Adrian said, lowering his voice so only I could hear again, your pack will still stand. If you stay, it will not be because you were cornered. It will be because you see me clearly. My certainty wavered, not shattered, but no longer immovable. I had come prepared to resist a tyrant. Instead, I stood before a king who was asking to be understood. The leather folder felt heavier than it should have when the guard placed it into my hands, as if it carried more than paper, more than ink, more than a decade of unanswered questions. The royal seal pressed into the wax was unmistakable, the crest of Blackwood etched in silver thread across the flap. 200 wolves watched as I broke the seal, but in that moment the vast hall seemed to shrink to the space between my heartbeat and the parchment beneath my fingers. The first letter was dated 10 years ago, written in my mother's unmistakable script, elegant and steady. She addressed him not as Your Majesty, but as Adrian. The familiarity struck deeper than any accusation I had carried in silence. I scanned the lines quickly at first, searching for proof of manipulation, for any hint that this was crafted for my benefit. Instead I found gratitude. She wrote of negotiations that spared border towns from famine, of safe passage granted to refugees, of a young king burdened by a crown he had not sought but refused to abandon. My chest tightened as I turned the page. In the final paragraph, she asked him to remember Silver Hollow if peace ever weakened. She did not ask for power. She did not ask for wealth. She asked for protection. My vision blurred for a moment, not from tears but from the shift of something I had held as certain for so long. Around us, the hall remained silent, the weight of expectation suspended like a held breath. I lowered the letter slowly. Why did you never tell us? I asked, my voice quieter now, stripped of its earlier edge. Adrian did not move to reclaim the folder. Because your mother valued dignity, he said. She did not wish her loyalty to be seen as debt. And I would not use her name to secure your compliance. Compliance. The word would have sounded harsh from any other mouth, but in his it felt honest. My father stepped forward from the edge of the platform, his face pale. Evelyn, he began, but I lifted a hand slightly, not to silence him in disrespect, but to ask for space. I needed clarity more than reassurance. If the protection stands without marriage, I said, turning back to Adrian, then why offer marriage at all? His gaze held mine unwavering. Because alliances forged through fear do not endure, he answered. And because from the moment you walked into this hall, you did not look at me with obedience. You looked at me with fire. A faint warmth crept up my spine, unexpected and unwelcome. I had not come here to be seen. I had come here to resist. Fire can burn, I said. It can, he agreed. It can also light a kingdom. The torches along the walls flickered as if echoing his words. For the first time since entering Blackwood Citadel, I felt the shift within the room. The elders were no longer bracing for punishment. The wolves in the back rows were no longer anticipating a public humiliation. They were witnessing something else entirely, something unfamiliar in royal courts. A negotiation without force. I looked down once more at my mother's handwriting, At the final line where she signed her name with confidence rather than fear. The narrative I had carried for years felt incomplete, not shattered but widened. When I raised my eyes again, I did not see a tyrant waiting to claim me. I saw a king who had given me the one thing no one else had offered in this hall: time, and the freedom to decide what to do with it. The silence in the hall did not feel oppressive anymore. It felt suspended, like the moment before a decision changes the course of a life. I held my mother's letter against my chest for a brief second before lowering it, the parchment still warm from my hands. 200 pairs of eyes watched, waiting for surrender or defiance, but what rose inside me was neither. It was something steadier. If I remain here, I said slowly, my voice carrying through the chamber without strain, it will not be because I am traded like land or coin. It will not be because Silver Hollow fears you. My father inhaled sharply, but Adrian did not interrupt. He stood a few feet away, shoulders squared yet unthreatening, giving me the space he had promised. It will be because I see the truth for myself, I continued. Not the stories whispered in kitchens. Not the titles carved into stone. The truth. A faint shift moved through the crowd. The elders leaned toward one another, uncertain. The younger wolves looked between us with open curiosity. Adrian inclined his head once, not in dominance but in acknowledgement. Then stay, he said. Not as my bride. Not yet. Stay as my guest. See how this kingdom stands. Speak to those who serve it. Ask them who I am. The simplicity of the offer unsettled me more than any command could have. You would open your court to scrutiny? I asked. To yours, he replied. A quiet confidence underlined his words, not arrogance, not challenge. Confidence. I studied him carefully, searching for calculation behind his calm. All I found was patience. The torches along the walls burned steadily, their light tracing the sharp lines of his face, softening the severity I had expected to find. And if I choose to leave? I pressed. Then you leave with protection and with answers, he said. Your pack remains under my guard regardless of your decision. My heart pounded once, hard enough that I felt it in my throat. Protection without condition. Freedom without penalty. Those were not the tools of a tyrant. They were the marks of a leader who understood that loyalty could not be demanded, only earned. I turned slightly, meeting my father's gaze. Fear still lingered there, but something else had joined it. Hope. The hall no longer felt like a place of judgment. Felt like a crossroads. I looked back at Adrian. 3 days, I said. I will stay in Blackwood for 3 days. I will speak to your council. I will walk your city streets. I will see how your people live. A murmur swept through the chamber at the boldness of setting terms for a king. Adrian did not flinch. 3 days, he agreed. You will have full access. He stepped aside then, a deliberate gesture that cleared the path beside him rather than blocking it. The message was unmistakable. I was not being led. I was being invited. As I took my first step forward, the marble floor cool beneath my shoes, I felt the weight of every eye in the hall shift from scrutiny to anticipation. I had entered Blackwood prepared to refuse a crown. I had not expected to be offered something far more dangerous. The chance to change my mind. The first morning in Blackwood did not begin with ceremony or spectacle. It began with quiet. Sunlight filtered through the tall arched windows of the east wing, casting long gold ribbons across the stone floors as I stood alone on a balcony overlooking the capital. The city stretched nearly a mile in every direction, slate rooftops and narrow streets waking beneath a pale winter sky. Smoke curled from chimneys. Merchants opened wooden shutters. Children ran between market stalls with laughter that carried faintly even at this height. This was not the image of a kingdom trembling under cruelty. It was orderly, alive, intentional. A soft knock sounded behind me before the door opened. Adrian stepped onto the balcony without escort, dressed simply in a dark coat and boots polished but unadorned. No crown. No armor. You rise early, he observed, his voice calm in the crisp air. So do you, I replied. He joined me at the railing but kept a respectful distance, nearly 2 feet between us, as though the space itself mattered. I thought you might prefer to see the city before it sees you, he said. People speak more freely when they do not know they are being observed. There was no manipulation in the statement, only practicality. I studied the streets below, watching a woman kneel to adjust a child's scarf, watching a baker carry fresh loaves into his shop. They do not look afraid, I admitted quietly. Fear is a poor foundation for loyalty, he answered. It collapses the moment pressure eases. I turned to face him fully. And what is your foundation? I asked. He met my gaze without hesitation. Stability, accountability, and fairness even when it is inconvenient. His honesty unsettled me more than grand declarations would have. You speak as though ruling is a burden, I said. It is, he replied simply. One measured in sleepless nights and decisions that must outlive personal preference. A breeze brushed past us, carrying the scent of pine from the surrounding forest. For a moment neither of us spoke. The distance between king and guest felt smaller than it had in the hall, not because he stepped closer, but because he did not need to. Today, he continued, you will walk through the market. You will speak to the Council of Trade. This afternoon, you will meet the captain of the city guard and the healers at St. Rowan's infirmary. Ask them what you wish. I will not accompany you. I blinked in surprise. You trust them to speak honestly without you present? If they cannot, he said, then I have already failed. The clarity in his voice left no room for doubt. He was not performing leadership. He was practicing it. I rested my hands on the cold stone railing and allowed myself to absorb the view again. 3 days. That was all I had asked for. Yet already something within me felt less rigid, less certain of the anger I had carried for years. I had expected to endure these days, to collect evidence and return home unchanged. Instead, standing beside a king who did not command my silence, I realized the more dangerous possibility. I might discover that my refusal had never been about him at all, but about the fear of being seen as equal to someone I had misunderstood. By midday I had walked nearly 3 miles through the heart of Blackwood, the hem of my coat brushing against market tables, the noise of bargaining and laughter rising around me without restraint. No herald announced my presence. No guard cleared a path. I moved through the city as a stranger, and the city moved around me without fear. A merchant selling woven blankets spoke candidly about taxes, explaining that rates had been lowered after a harsh winter 2 years ago. A young woman outside the infirmary described new trade routes that brought medicine from the southern territories. No one spoke in hushed tones. No one glanced over their shoulder before answering. When I reached St. Rowan's infirmary, the scent of clean linen and dried herbs filled the air. Inside, sunlight poured through tall windows onto rows of neatly arranged cots. The head healer, an older man with steady hands and kind eyes, greeted me without ceremony. You are from Silver Hollow, he said after I introduced myself. Your mother once visited this ward. My chest tightened at the mention of her. You remember her? I asked. He smiled faintly. She asked questions the way you do. Direct. Curious. She wanted to understand systems, not just outcomes. I swallowed, absorbing the quiet pride in his tone. And the king? I pressed. What kind of ruler funds this place? The healer did not hesitate. One who knows that strength without care weakens from within. He gestured toward new equipment stacked against the wall. These arrived last month. Paid for without fanfare. I thanked him and stepped back into the street, the winter sun high overhead now, warming the stone beneath my boots. Every conversation left me with fewer reasons to cling to resentment and more questions about the narrative I had accepted for years. By late afternoon I stood at the edge of the training grounds where members of the city guard practiced drills. The captain, a tall woman with a firm but measured presence, spoke openly about accountability within the ranks. We answer to the law before we answer to the crown, she said. And the king insists on it. The phrase lingered with me as I walked back toward the citadel, the sky shifting from pale blue to streaks of amber. Nearly 12 hours had passed since I had stepped onto the balcony that morning. 12 hours of observation without interference. When I entered the outer courtyard, I found Adrian standing alone near the fountain at its center, hands clasped loosely behind his back as he watched the city beyond the gates. He turned as I approached but did not ask for a report. He simply waited. They speak well of you, I said after a moment. He inclined his head slightly. I hope they speak honestly. The fading sunlight caught in his silver eyes, softening the sharpness I once associated with authority. If they did not, I replied, I would have found it. A faint warmth crossed his expression, subtle but unmistakable. And have you? He asked quietly. I hesitated, not because I lacked an answer, but because the answer required vulnerability. I have found consistency, I said at last, between your words and your actions. The admission felt significant, more so than any declaration of trust. He did not step closer. He did not press for more. He only nodded, as though acknowledging a milestone neither of us had predicted. As evening shadows stretched across the courtyard, I realized that the anger I once carried so confidently had begun to loosen its hold. Not replaced by devotion. Not yet. But replaced by something steadier. Respect. The third morning in Blackwood arrived with a sharp chill in the air, the kind of crispness that suggested winter was not finished with us yet. The city was quieter than the day before, the streets more still, as if waiting for something. Or perhaps it was simply the calm before the final decision was made. I had requested to speak with the council that morning, and Adrian had agreed, though he did not join us. His absence left the room charged with a peculiar tension, as if his very presence had been the only thing holding the voices in check. The room was lined with stone lit by narrow windows that let in the dim light of early morning. A long wooden table stretched across the center, and around it sat men and women whose faces were stern, their eyes sharp with the understanding that their words were measured and weighed carefully. They greeted me with polite nods but said little, leaving me to fill the silence with my own questions. How long have you known the king? I asked one of the older men, his gray hair a sign of the years he had spent at Adrian's side. Long enough to know that he does not seek popularity, the man replied, his voice low but steady. But when it comes to his people, he is steadfast. His actions, not his words, speak for him. And yet, I pressed, his actions have brought us here. The council members exchanged glances, the weight of the past still sitting heavily between them. The king does not act in haste, the same man replied. His decisions are deliberate, always for the greater good, even when they appear harsh in the moment. I nodded, though I was not fully convinced. What then did the greater good look like? Adrian had offered me nothing but transparency, yet I was still uncertain of what was to come, of what I was walking into. After the meeting, I spent the rest of the day speaking with the people who worked in the city. The workers in the foundries, the apprentices in the shops, the guards on the walls. I asked about the king, about how they saw him, what they felt. Some spoke of him with awe, others with respect, but none with fear. He was a king, yes, but one who understood that his power was not absolute, not when it came to the lives of those he ruled. The evening found me back in the courtyard of the citadel, standing before the fountain where Adrian had been the night before. This time he was not alone. He stood with his counselors, speaking quietly with them, his posture relaxed yet commanding, his voice carrying over the low murmur of the conversation. When he saw me, he excused himself and walked toward me, his presence somehow larger now, as though I had seen only a fraction of it before. Have you learned what you needed? He asked, his voice warm but neutral. I hesitated, not because I lacked an answer, but because the answer had shifted over the past few days. I have, I said, looking into his eyes, seeing something there that I had not noticed before. Trust, perhaps. And what is your decision? He asked, his gaze steady. I took a deep breath, the weight of the question sitting heavily in my chest. I need more time, I said. Adrian nodded, as though this was the answer he had expected. Of course, he said softly. You will have it. The promise was simple, but it carried more weight than any demand could have. In that moment, I understood that it was not power that defined this man. It was the willingness to share it, to allow others to choose. And perhaps for the first time since arriving, I saw the true strength in his leadership. The days stretched on, and with each one, the distance between my old self and the person I was becoming seemed to widen. I had come to Blackwood with a single purpose, to resist. But now, each conversation, each moment spent with the people who lived here, began to chip away at the walls I had so carefully built. Adrian's offer of time, of space to choose, had shifted something inside me. It was not simply the freedom to make a decision. It was the invitation to see beyond the image I had held of him. I had expected to find a tyrant, a ruler who used fear to control. But I found a king who understood that real power came from trust, from allowing others to see your flaws, to question your decisions without the fear of punishment. It was on the fourth day, as I stood before the great hall awaiting my final meeting with Adrian, that I realized I was no longer measuring him against the king I had imagined. I was measuring him against the man who had shown me kindness, patience, and a willingness to let me choose. The council had made their case, the merchants had shared their stories, and I had spent hours speaking with the people of Blackwood, asking them what they saw in their king. What I had heard time and time again was not fear but respect, a respect that was earned not by power, but by fairness, by consistency, by listening. As the evening shadows stretched across the citadel, I found myself standing at the balcony once more, looking out over the city. The light was fading, but the city below still buzzed with life, with energy, with the pulse of a place that was thriving. It was then that Adrian joined me, his presence a steady force at my side. We stood in silence for a moment, both of us watching the city, and for the first time I realized that I had no intention of leaving. "You've learned much in these days," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence. "More than I expected," I replied, turning to face him. His gaze met mine, steady and unwavering. "And your decision?" he asked, as if he already knew the answer. I took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling over me like a mantle. "I choose to stay," I said, the words slipping out more easily than I had imagined. His eyes softened just slightly, and for the first time since I had arrived, I saw a flicker of something in his gaze, relief maybe. "Then you will have what you need, Evelyn," he said, his voice low and sincere. "Not just as a guest, but as a part of this kingdom, as a partner." The word hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning but not demanding. "What does that mean?" I asked, the question leaving my lips before I could stop it. "It means," he said, stepping closer, "that the future we build will not be one of ruling over others, but of ruling with them. Together." The simplicity of his answer, the clarity in his tone, was enough to make my heart beat faster. This was not about power. This was about choice. About trust. About finding strength in unity rather than dominance. And for the first time, I realized that the future I had been so determined to resist was not one I had to fight against. It was one I could help shape. We stood there for a long while, the sound of the city fading around us as the stars began to fill the sky, and in that moment everything seemed possible. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, discussions, and quiet moments of reflection. I had chosen to stay, but I had not yet fully understood what that choice meant. Every interaction, every conversation seemed to carry more weight now, as though the decision I had made had already begun to change things. Adrian remained as steadfast and patient as ever, never pushing, never rushing me. He gave me the time I needed to see beyond the surface, to understand the complexities of the kingdom he had built, and the people who lived within it. As the sun began to set on the final day of my decision, I found myself standing once more at the balcony, gazing out over the city. The streets were quiet now, the bustling markets of the past days subdued in the fading light. It was here, in this stillness, that I finally understood the weight of the choice I had made. I was no longer resisting. I was no longer an outsider looking in. I was a part of something I had not anticipated when I first arrived in Blackwood. The sound of footsteps behind me broke my thoughts, and I turned to find Adrian approaching, his expression thoughtful. He did not speak immediately, choosing instead to stand beside me and take in the view as well. "You've learned much," he said after a moment, his voice calm but carrying the weight of the last few days. "More than I expected," I replied, my voice steady, though there was an undercurrent of something more in my words. He glanced at me, a flicker of something passing through his eyes, but he said nothing. Instead, he simply nodded. "And what do you think of it all?" he asked, his gaze returning to the city below. I took a deep breath, allowing myself to process everything I had seen, everything I had felt. "I think," I began slowly, "that what you've built here is not what I expected. I thought I would find a kingdom ruled by fear, a people living under the weight of a crown that demanded compliance. But instead I see something else. I see people who respect you not out of fear but out of trust, out of understanding." He was silent for a long time. his eyes still fixed on the horizon. It wasn't the response I had anticipated, but in a way it felt like the answer he had been waiting for. Finally, he turned to me. His expression softened by something I couldn't quite name. "And what of you, Evelyn?" he asked, his voice low and earnest. "What do you want now?" I met his gaze, steady and sure, as if the weight of my decision had settled into my bones. "I want to help build what comes next," I said. "Not as a queen, not as a princess, but as someone who can stand beside you, not behind you." The words were simple, but they carried the truth I had discovered in the last few days. I had not come to Blackwood to follow a king, to be led. I had come to stand with him, to help shape the future that we would create together. Adrian's gaze softened, and for the first time since I had arrived, I saw a glimpse of the man behind the crown. "Then we will build it together," he said, his voice steady and resolute. The future was no longer something I feared. It was something I was ready to create. Together.